Welcome to the Spitzen-Körper Thelema. In 1911, A-lister Crowley published Liber LXXI, a commentary on what he called fragments from the Book of the Golden Precepts, ostensibly drawn from Madame Blavatsky's The Voice of the Silence, though Crowley himself had authored much of the original material. This was a moment of deliberate rupture. Crowley was dismantling theosophy from within while simultaneously inheriting its architecture. Blavatsky had codified a Western mysticism drawn from Sanskrit terminology and Eastern cosmology. Crowley was now weaponizing that same vocabulary against sentimentality and false attainment. The new eon had arrived, he insisted. Its word was "do what thou wilt." The old guard, the Mahatma snobs, as he called them, the spiritual poseurs of Boston drawing rooms, had to be cleared away. This particular section, the opening verses with their dense commentary, establishes the fundamental trap that ensnares nearly every serious practitioner: the confusion between genuine mystical advancement and the elaborate, seductive illusions that masquerade as it. It belongs to the lineage of Advaita Vedanta as filtered through Victorian occultism, but Crowley's intervention was ruthlessly modern. He was not interested in consoling the aspirant. He was interested in breaking him. What you are about to hear is not encouragement. It is a map of pitfalls. The text itself is Blavatsky's, the commentary is Crowley's blade applied to her work. He removes her notes entirely, calling them diffuse, inaccurate, and designed to mislead, and replaces them with something far more dangerous: precision. The passage opens with a strange admission of dual audience. Crowley acknowledges that the text can be read at multiple depths. The tyro will find instructions for basic practice. The advanced initiate will detect what lies between the lines. But this is not generosity. It is a statement of the problem itself. The very structure of the teaching creates the possibility of self-deception. Each reader will glean his own wheat, Crowley observes, but the problem is that most readers will glean only the chaff and mistake it for nourishment. Now, the text itself. These instructions are for those ignorant of the dangers of the lower ide, magical powers. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Nothing less can satisfy than this motion in your orbit. It is important to reject any idea of which you may become possessed. Firstly, because of the wasting of energy, which should rather be concentrated on further advance, and secondly, because ideas are in many cases so seductive that they lead the unwary to forget altogether the real purpose of their endeavors. The student must be prepared for temptations of the most extraordinary subtlety, as the scriptures of the Christians mystically put it, in their queer but often illuminating jargon. The devil can disguise himself as an angel of light. A species of parenthesis is necessary thus early in this comment. One must warn the reader that he is going to swim in very deep waters. To begin with, it is assumed throughout that the student is already familiar with at least the elements of mysticism. True, you are supposed to be ignorant of the dangers of the lower ide, but there are really quite a lot of people, even in Boston, who do not know that there are any ide at all, low or high. However, one who has been assiduous with Book 4, by Frate Padurabo, should have no difficulty so far as a general comprehension of the subject matter of the book is concerned. Too ruddy a cheerfulness on the part of the assiduous one will however be premature, to say the least. For the fact is that this treatise does not contain an intelligible and coherent cosmogony. The unfortunate Lanu is in the position of a sea captain who is furnished with the most elaborate and detailed sailing instructions, but is not allowed to have the slightest idea of what port he is to make, still less given a chart of the ocean. One finds oneself accordingly in a sort of Child Roland to the Dark Tower came atmosphere. That poem of Browning owes much of its haunting charm to this very circumstance, that the reader is never told who Child Roland is, or why he wants to get to the Dark Tower, or what he expects to find when he does get there. There is a skillfully constructed atmosphere of giants, and ogres, and hunchbacks, and the rest of the apparatus of fairy tales, but there is no trace of the influence of Decker in the style. Now this is really very irritating to anybody who happens to be seriously concerned to get to that tower. I remember, as a boy, what misery I suffered over this poem. Had Browning been alive, I think I would have sought him out, so seriously did I take the quest. The student of Blavatsky is equally handicapped. Fortunately, Book 4, Part 3, comes to the rescue once more with a rough sketch of the universe as it is conceived by those who know it, and a regular investigation of that book, and the companion volumes ordered in the curriculum of the UACOMA fortified by steady persistence in practical personal exploration, will enable this voice of the silence to become a serious guide in some of the subtler obscurities which weigh upon the eyelids of the seeker. He who would hear the voice of Nada, the soundless sound, and comprehend it, he has to learn the nature of dharana, concentrated thought. The voice of Nada is very soon heard by the beginner, especially during the practice of pranayama, control of breath force. At first it resembles distant surf, though in the Adept it is more like the twittering of innumerable nightingales, but this sound is premonitory, as it were, the veil of more distinct and articulate sounds which come later. It corresponds in hearing to that dark veil which is seen when the eyes are closed, although in this case a certain degree of progress is necessary before anything at all is heard. Having become indifferent to objects of perception, the pupil must seek out the Raja, king, of the senses, the thought producer, he who awakes illusion. The word indifferent here implies able to shut out. The Raja referred to is in that spot whence thoughts spring. He turns out ultimately to be Mayan, the great magician described in the third Ethir. Let the student notice that in his early meditations, all his thoughts will be under the tamagana, the principle of inertia and darkness. When he has destroyed all those, he will be under the dominion of an entirely new set of the type of Rajogana, the principle of activity, and so on. To the advanced student a simple ordinary thought, which seems little or nothing to the beginner, becomes a great and terrible fountain of iniquity, and the higher he goes, up to a certain point, the point of definitive victory, the more that is the case. The beginner can think, "It is 10 o'clock," and dismiss the thought. To the mind of the adept this sentence will awaken all its possible correspondences, all the reflections he has ever made on time, as also accidental sympathetics like Mr. Whistler's essay, and if he is sufficiently far advanced, all these thoughts in their hundreds and thousands diverging from the one thought, will again converge, and become the resultant of all those thoughts. He will get samadhi upon that original thought, and this will be a terrible enemy to his progress. The mind is the great slayer of the real. In the word mind we should include all phenomena of mind, including samadhi itself. Any phenomenon has causes and produces results, and all these things are below the real. By the real is here meant the Nibbana-dhatu. Let the disciple slay the slayer. 4. This is a corollary of verse 4. These texts may be interpreted in a quite elementary sense. It is of course the object of even the beginner to suppress mind and all its manifestations, but only as he advances will he discover what mind means. When to himself his form appears unreal, as do on waking all the forms he sees in dreams, this is a somewhat elementary result. Concentration on any subject leads soon enough to a sudden and overwhelming conviction that the object is unreal. The reason of this may perhaps be, speaking philosophically, that the object, whatever it is, has only a relative existence. When he has ceased to hear the many, he may discern the one. The inner sound which kills the outer. By the many are meant primarily noises which take place outside the student, and secondly, those which take place inside him. For example, the pulsation of the blood in the ears, and later the mystic sounds which are described in further verses. Then only, not till then, shall he forsake the region of Asat, the false, to come unto the realm of Sat, the true. By Sat, the true, is meant a thing previous to the real referred to above. Sat itself is an illusion. Some schools of philosophy have a higher Asat, not being, which is beyond Sat, and consequently is to Shiva Darshana as Sat is to Atma Darshana. Nirvana is beyond both these. Before the soul can see, the harmony within must be attained, and fleshly eyes be rendered blind to all illusion. By the harmony within is meant that state in which neither objects of sense, nor physiological sensations, nor emotions, can disturb the concentration of thought. Before the soul can hear, the image, man, has to become as deaf to roarings as to whispers, to cries of bellowing elephants as to the silvery buzzing of the golden firefly. In the text the image is explained as man, but it more properly refers to the consciousness of man, which consciousness is considered as being a reflection of the non-ego, or a creation of the ego, according to the school of philosophy to which the student may belong. Before the soul can comprehend and may remember, she must unto the silent speaker be united just as the form to which the clay is modelled, is first united with the potter's mind. Any actual object of the senses is considered as a precipitation of an ideal. Just as no existing triangle is a pure triangle, since it must be either equilateral, isosceles, or scalene, so every object is a miscarriage of an ideal. In the course of practice one concentrates upon a given thing, rejecting this outer appearance and arriving at that ideal, which of course will not in any way resemble any of the objects which are its incarnations. It is with this in view that the verse tells us that the soul must be united to the silent speaker. The words silent speaker may be considered as a hieroglyph of the same character as logos or the ineffable name. For then the soul will hear and will remember. The word here alludes to the tradition that hearing is the organ of spirit, just as seeing is that of fire. The word remember might be explained as will attain to memory. Memory is the link between the atoms of consciousness, for each successive consciousness of man is a single phenomenon, and has no connection with any other. A looking glass knows nothing of the different people that look into it. It only reflects one at a time. The brain is however more like a sensitive plate, and memory is the faculty of bringing up into consciousness any picture required. As this occurs in the normal man with his own experiences, so it occurs in the adept with all experiences. And then to the inner ear will speak, the voice of the silence, and say, what follows must be regarded as the device of the poet. For of course the voice of the silence cannot be interpreted in words. What follows is only its utterance in respect of the path itself. If thy soul smiles while bathing in the sunlight of thy life, if thy soul sings within her chrysalis of flesh and matter, if thy soul weeps inside her castle of illusion, if thy soul struggles to break the silver thread that binds her to the master, know, O disciple, thy soul is of the earth. In this verse the student is exhorted to indifference to everything but his own progress. It does not mean the indifference of the man to the things around him, as it has often been so unworthily and wickedly interpreted. The indifference spoken of is a kind of inner indifference. Everything should be enjoyed to the full, but always with the reservation that the absence of the thing enjoyed shall not cause regret. This is too hard for the beginner, and in many cases it is necessary for him to abandon pleasures in order to prove to himself that he is indifferent to them, and it may be occasionally advisable even for the adept to do this now and again. Of course, during periods of actual concentration there is no time whatever for anything but the work itself, but to make even the mildest asceticism a rule of life is the gravest of errors, except perhaps that of regarding asceticism as a virtue. This latter always leads to spiritual pride, and spiritual pride is the principal quality of the brother of the left-hand path. Ascetic comes from the Greek word to work curiously, to adorn, to exercise, to train. The Latin ars is derived from this same word. Artist, in its finest sense of creative craftsman, is therefore the best translation. The word has degenerated under Puritan foulness. When to the world's turmoil thy budding soul lends ear, when to the roaring voice of the great illusion thy soul responds, when frightened at the sight of the hot tears of pain, when deafened by the cries of distress, thy soul withdraws like the shy turtle within the carapace of selfhood, learn, O disciple, of her silent God, thy soul is an unworthy shrine. This verse deals with an obstacle at a more advanced stage. It is again a warning not to shut one's self up in one's own universe. It is not by the exclusion of the non-ego that saintship is attained, but by its inclusion. Love is the law, love under will. When waxing stronger, thy soul glides forth from her secure retreat, and breaking loose from the protecting shrine, extends her silver thread and rushes onward. When beholding her image on the waves of space she whispers, "This is I, declare, O disciple, that thy soul is caught in the webs of delusion." An even more advanced instruction, but still connected with the question of the ego and the non-ego. The phenomenon described is perhaps Atma-darshana, which is still a delusion, in one sense still a delusion of personality, for although the ego is destroyed in the universe, and the universe in it, there is a distinct though exceedingly subtle tendency to sum up its experience as ego. These three verses might be interpreted also as quite elementary, the first as blindness to the first noble truth that everything is sorrow, the second as the coward's attempt to escape sorrow by retreat, and the third as the acceptance of the astral as sat. This earth, disciple, is the hall of sorrow, wherein are set along the path of dire probations, traps to ensnare thy ego by the delusion called great heresy. Develops still further these remarks. This earth, O ignorant disciple, is but the dismal entrance leading to the twilight that precedes the valley of true light, that light which no wind can extinguish, that light which burns without a wick or fuel. Twilight here may again refer to Atma-darshana. The last phrase is borrowed from Eliphas Levi, who was not, I believe, a Tibetan of antiquity. Saith the great law, in order to become the knower of all self, thou hast first of self to be the knower. To reach the knowledge of that self, thou hast to give up self to non-self, being to non-being. What Crowley has given us here is a theory of advanced mystical practice as a minefield of recursive self-deception. The central argument emerges across three layers. First, that magical powers, ID, are not signs of progress but precisely the opposite. They are seductions that exhaust energy and distract from the actual work. Second, that the mind itself, in all its manifestations including the highest state of samadhi, is still below what is real. This inverts the usual spiritual narrative entirely. Where Western occultism had often celebrated the development of mental and astral powers as achievement, Crowley, working here through Blavatsky's framework, insisted that such development was a symptom of still being trapped in illusion. The student who can perform wonders has merely decorated his prison. Third, and most cutting, that even the experiences traditionally understood as enlightenment, the vision of unity, the sense of cosmic consciousness, the mystical absorption into all, are themselves traps, because they are still phenomena of mind, still dualistic experiences of an apparently unified subject. Atma-darshana, the vision of the self, is itself delusion. This is the mutation of Advaita Vedanta through a Western lens. Where classical Vedantic teachers had posited a hierarchy of realization ascending toward Brahman, Crowley collapses that hierarchy and insists that every rung of it, including the penultimate ones, is contaminated by the fundamental problem, the persistence of subject-object duality. The only way out is not up but through, a complete dissolution that the text cannot speak of, which is why the voice of silence remains silent. What it has seeded is an entire current of modern magical thinking, the suspicion that the traditional markers of attainment, visions, powers, states of bliss, even the experience of unity itself, are precisely what keep you from what lies beyond them. This idea runs through Gurdjieff, through later magic, through contemporary Buddhistically informed Western occultism. Crowley gave it a form that refused consolation or flattery. He was not interested in making you feel like a wizard. He was interested in breaking you down to the point where you might actually begin to understand what you are asking for. Next, Eliphas Levi, Dogma and Ritual of High Magic. The Spitzen-Körper Thelema. If this archive serves you, support it on Patreon. Link in the description.